Most men think the worst thing a woman can do when she discovers a betrayal is scream. They expect the broken plates, the tear-stained face, and the desperate, clawing questions. That is what my husband, Richard, was waiting for. That is what he had scripted for me, scene by scene, over the course of 8 long, meticulously calculated years. My name is Elena Vance. I am 40 years old, and for the past 12 years, I've made my living as a senior asset valuation expert and real estate forensic auditor in Chicago. My entire professional life has been built on a single, unyielding truth. Numbers do not lie. People do. Every hidden debt, every disguised asset, every fraudulent signature leaves a digital footprint, a microscopic scar in the ledger that no amount of charm can erase. And yet, for 8 of those years, I sat across the breakfast table from a man who treated my profession as a cute hobby, completely unaware that he was building a financial gallows with my own name forged at the bottom. It started on a Tuesday evening in late October. The sharp Chicago autumn wind rattled the glass of my downtown loft, but inside it was dead silent. I wasn't weeping, I wasn't drowning my sorrows in cheap Merlot. Instead, I had a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside my keyboard, its steam curling upward as the screen glowed with routine mortgage refinancing files for our state. As an auditor, your eyes are trained to look past the grand totals and hunt for anomalies, the microscopic rounding errors that look like statistical noise. That was when I saw it, a tiny, misplaced decimal point in a secondary escrow transfer ledger dating back to November, just 18 months after our wedding day. I didn't gasp. My heart didn't skip a frantic beat. My chest simply went cold, the absolute silence of a winter lake freezing over in a single night. I began pulling the threads. I didn't stop at one file. I went back year by year, account by account. What I uncovered wasn't a sudden lapse of judgment or a drunken mistake born of a rough patch. It was a patient, cold-blooded architectural masterpiece of financial erasure. Over the span of 8 years, Richard had systematically siphoned a total of $480,000 from our joint trust accounts, routing the capital through a web of shell companies registered under fictitious LLCs. But that was merely the scaffolding. Buried deep within the secondary credit line attachments was something far more lethal. A home equity line of credit worth $1.2 million, secured against our primary estate, bearing my signature. Except I had never signed it. The handwriting was an eerie, terrifyingly exact mimicry of my own, down to the slight upward slope of the letter V and the hurried looping of the E. He had studied my hand the way a master forger studies a Renaissance painting, practicing it thousands of times while I slept beside him, believing I was safe in a life I had chosen. I sat back in my leather chair, taking a slow, measured sip of my chamomile tea. The liquid was lukewarm now. In that precise moment, the pieces of a much larger, darker puzzle clicked violently into place. Richard wasn't just having an affair with his 26-year-old legal assistant, Chloe, a girl's name I found attached to several consulting fees paid out of those very same shell companies. He was executing a black swan event. The debt he had accumulated under my forged signature wasn't meant to be paid off, it was meant to explode. His plan was simple, vicious, and breathtakingly complete. Let the interest mount, manufacture a paper trail of erratic behavior in my name, frame me as an unstable debtor on the verge of a psychiatric collapse, and then, when the trap was fully sprung, announce my sudden, convenient disappearance. Once I was legally declared a missing person, he would inherit clean title to our estate and clear access to the $3.5 million inheritance trust left to me by my late parents. He wanted me ruined, indebted, erased, and forgotten. Most women in my position would have grabbed a phone, dialed his number, and screamed until their throat split. They would have confronted him in the hallway or demanded an immediate explanation. I did none of those things because I knew that the moment you show your enemy that you see their blade, you give them the chance to change their grip. Richard wanted a hysterical wife. He needed me unstable so his fabricated narrative would hold weight before a judge and a jury. If I lashed out, I would be playing right into Act 1 of his script. Instead, I closed my laptop, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, and stared out at the glittering lights of the Chicago skyline cutting through the dark autumn rain. A strange, clinical clarity settled over my bones. I didn't feel broken. I felt awake. For 31 minutes, I stood there in the dark, watching the red taillights crawl along Lakeshore Drive, calculating every variable, weighing every risk, and establishing the foundational rule of my counteroffensive. Richard thought he had spent 8 years turning me into his unwitting accomplice. He didn't realize a simple, terrifying reality about women like me. We don't break when life shatters. We become architects. And as I turned back to my desk to export the encrypted bank records onto a secure flash drive, I knew exactly what my first move would be. He had spent 8 years building a cage out of forged signatures and stolen numbers. I was going to take those exact same numbers, lock the door from the outside, and throw away the key. 3 weeks before I sat down with those audit files in my downtown loft, Richard had already begun rolling out Act 1 of his little stage play. It started on a Tuesday afternoon at our suburban estate in Naperville. I was in the sunroom reviewing quarterly valuations when Richard came rushing down the hallway, frantically wiping non-existent sweat from his forehead, playing the part of the concerned, bewildered homeowner to absolute perfection. He claimed the smart HVAC and climate control network in the master wing had suffered a complete electronic lockup and that he had already called an emergency private contractor to clear the hidden lines. An hour later, a young technician arrived with a heavy tool chest. He wasn't from our regular utility provider. He was a quiet, nervous kid who wouldn't look me in the eye, moving straight toward the secondary guest suite upstairs with a speed that felt far too rehearsed. While Richard stood downstairs acting jittery and offering him bottled water, I quietly slipped up the back staircase and pressed my ear to the paneling of the guest bedroom. I heard the sharp, high-pitched whine of a compact core drill biting straight through the drywall and into the main ventilation duct directly above the ceiling crawlspace. They thought they were being clever. What they didn't know is that sound carries differently when you understand the structural anatomy of a house. When the technician left 40 minutes later, I waited until Richard drove off to his office. I climbed the folding ladder into the dark crawlspace with a flashlight. Tucked deep inside the dark aluminum elbow of the ductwork, bolted down with a fresh metal bracket, was a small battery-operated audio emitter, looping a low, mechanical grinding noise, paired with a cheap, prepaid burner phone, flashing with unread text notifications. 2 days later, the trap snapped shut precisely the way Richard had engineered it, down to the very hour. It was mid-afternoon when 2 uniformed suburban patrol officers knocked on our front door, responding to an anonymous noise complaint and a panicked emergency call regarding suspicious activity and erratic behavior originating from inside our residence. Richard stood right behind them, his face sculpted into a masterclass of agonizing marital distress, wringing his hands as he played the helpless victim of a wife losing her grip on reality. The officers climbed into the ceiling crawlspace with a flashlight and crowbar. Within minutes, they pulled out the exact items Richard had planted: the looping noise device, the burner phone, and, most damning of all, a laminated plastic keycard for a local public storage unit on Route 59, registered under my maiden name, along with forged paperwork folder containing an unfamiliar woman's suitcase,
old airline tickets, and fake identity cards designed to frame me as a fugitive preparing to skip town. One of the young officers stepped down from the ladder, looking at me with a mixture of professional suspicion and heavy pity. He flipped open the storage agreement lease and asked me point blank, "Mrs. Vance, can you explain why your legal signature is on this rental lease for a unit containing a runaway's belongings?" I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice, and I certainly didn't offer a frantic defensive denial. I simply looked the officer dead in the eyes, tilted my head with a faint, chilling smile, and gave him the exact response that stripped the ground right out from under his script. "Officer," I said smoothly, my voice as calm as a frozen lake, "my signature is on a great many things in this world, but I suggest you ask my husband who actually holds the pen." The room went dead silent. The young officer blinked, clearly thrown off balance by my total lack of panic. I calmly stepped forward, took a pen from the counter, and signed the police log without a single trembling stroke. Nervous energy filled the room, but none of it came from me. Across the foyer, I caught Richard's reflection in the heavy mahogany hallway mirror. For a fraction of a second, the carefully practiced mask of the grieving, terrified husband cracked. His eyes widened just a millimeter as a sudden flash of cold, primitive unease cut straight through his triumphant self-satisfaction. He thought he was a grand master playing a brilliant game of chess, completely convinced of his own brilliance. He was entirely too arrogant to realize that the person he was trying to trap had just stopped playing by his rules, and that every single piece he had placed on the board was about to become the very weapon used to dismantle him completely. Beneath his confident exterior, a tiny spark of doubt had just been ignited, though his overwhelming greed and self-assurance quickly pushed it down, blinding him to the storm brewing right in front of him.
That very same night, under the cover of a freezing Chicago midnight drizzle, I packed a small overnight bag, started the engine of my Lexus, and drove north out of the city. I told Richard I was driving up to Wisconsin to check on my aging mother, who lived quietly in a rural township near Madison. It was a cover story designed to give him 24 hours of uninterrupted freedom, plenty of time for him and Chloe to celebrate how smoothly their little police trap had seemingly gone. In reality, my mother was sound asleep in her own bed, completely unaware of the storm brewing around our family. I didn't stop at her house. Instead, I drove straight toward Evanston, cutting through the empty suburban grid until I pulled up in front of a modest, weather-beaten brick building nestled off Church Street. A small, amber-lit sign above the frosted glass door read, "Thorne Financial Analytics and Consulting." The man waiting for me inside at 2 in the morning was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was not your average private investigator looking to snap blurry photographs of cheating spouses for a quick retainer. For over 20 years, he had served as a senior special agent with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, heading high-profile federal task forces, tracking offshore money laundering, corporate fraud, and sophisticated white-collar embezzlement schemes. Now, retired from active federal duty, he operated out of this quiet Evanston office, taking on only the cases that engaged his relentless analytical mind. When I pushed open the door, the heavy scent of stale black coffee and old paper greeted me. Marcus looked up from a desk cluttered with ledger sheets and half-dismantled laptop hard drives. He expected a frantic, emotionally shattered wife. He expected tears, trembling hands, and a messy plea for help. Instead, I walked across the room, set a heavy leather briefcase on his wooden desk, and unlatched the brass clasps with a clean, deliberate click. I didn't offer a single sob. I didn't waste his time with background melodrama or emotional complaints about 8 years of quiet betrayal.
I simply slid 3 thick, meticulously organized binders across the desk toward him. The first binder contained 8 years of complete financial statements, routing numbers, and shell company registries detailing every single dollar Richard had siphoned from our joint accounts. The second binder held the digital GPS logs extracted from the internal telematics system of Richard's corporate Lexus, mapping out his secret late-night visits to an upscale downtown apartment registered under Chloe's name. The third binder held the receipts, lease agreements, and forged documentation associated with the public storage unit set up from 2 days prior. Marcus stared down at the documents, his weathered face shifting from casual professional indifference to absolute profound astonishment. He flipped through the first few pages, his eyes darting across columns of numbers, transaction codes, and corporate filings with the practiced speed of a veteran Fed. For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the steady hum of a desktop space heater and the rhythmic ticking of a wall clock. Then Marcus looked up, leaning back in his leather chair with a slow, appreciative whistle. "Mrs. Vance," Marcus said, his voice deep and gravelly, carrying the quiet weight of decades in federal enforcement. "Most people spend years trying to untangle a mess half this size. You didn't just find the threads, you brought me the entire loom." I held his gaze without flinching, resting my hands calmly on the edge of his desk. "I didn't come here to cry over a broken marriage, Mr. Thorne. I came here to build a cage." Marcus nodded slowly, the professional gears in his mind visibly locking into place. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him, uncapped a heavy metal fountain pen, and looked straight at me. "All right, if we go running straight to local law enforcement with this right now, bureaucratic red tape will choke us out. Standard criminal procedures move at a snail's pace, and filing a conventional police report immediately alerts Richard's corporate defense attorneys. They'll freeze assets, scrub digital servers, and paint you as an unstable, litigious spouse before a grand jury ever sees a single bank routing number." He paused, tapping the tip of his pen against the paper. "If we want to dismantle him completely, we don't just defend ourselves, we execute a reverse trap." Over the next 4 hours, under the pale glow of a desk lamp as the early morning rain tapped against the Evanston window panes, Marcus and I mapped out a rigorous, unforgiving 21-day counteroffensive. The strategy was built on 3 absolute pillars. First, we would bypass local precinct politics entirely and quietly assemble a comprehensive federal-grade financial dossier that local prosecutors couldn't ignore or delay. Second, we needed to isolate and neutralize the accomplice, Chloe, by cutting off the financial pipeline fueling her lifestyle and compelling her to flip before Richard realized the ground was sinking beneath his feet. And third, we had to prove without a shadow of a doubt that Richard wasn't just an unfaithful husband or an accidental debtor, but the active, malicious mastermind behind every single forged signature, illicit loan, and fabricated paper trail designed to ruin my life and steal my inheritance. Marcus looked up from his legal pad as the first pale sliver of dawn began to bleed through the frosted glass of his office window. He slid the completed timeline across the desk toward me. 21 days, Marcus murmured, his eyes sharp and steady. That's all we have before his next scheduled loan disbursement hits those shell companies. Let's make sure when he pulls the trigger on his final move, the gun is pointing directly at his own chest. I looked down at the plan, closed my briefcase with a firm click, and knew that the countdown had officially begun.
The 21-day countdown had begun, and every single chess piece needed to be placed in its exact position before Richard realized the board was shifting beneath him. The first critical phase of Marcus's plan didn't involve courts or subpoenas. It involved the very walls of the suburban estate Richard thought he controlled entirely. 2 days after my midnight meeting in Evanston, Marcus arrived at my downtown loft carrying a compact, matte black hardware module, no larger than a deck of cards. It was a secure, military-grade audio extraction bridge. Marcus spent over an hour walking me through the installation protocol, showing me how to seamlessly patch the device directly into the master routing hub of our home's smart automation system. Our estate in Naperville operated on an integrated digital hub, controlling lighting, climate, security feeds, and the internal room-to-room intercom network. Because Richard frequently used the system to coordinate remote property checks when I was supposedly out of town, the hub served as an open digital backdoor. By routing the secure extraction bridge through an encrypted proxy server, any audio transmission or intercom broadcast inside the master wing would stream in real time straight to a confidential, password-protected application on my phone. The opportunity came on a heavy, overcast Thursday afternoon in Chicago. A relentless autumn downpour was lashing against the glass of the downtown State Audit Bureau, where I sat at my desk reviewing routine corporate filings. My corporate calendar showed I was scheduled for an extended, multi-hour compliance review across town. That was when my phone softly vibrated in my palm. A silent alert flashed across the screen. Active intercom transmission detected in Master Suite. I slid a single wireless earbud into my left ear, pulling my hair down to conceal it, and turned my focus toward my laptop screen while the audio feed connected. The rain outside was roaring against the windows, but inside my ear, the voices of my husband and his 26-year-old legal assistant came through with terrifying, crystal-clear definition. Richard had brought Chloe back to our marital home, assuming the miles between us and my supposed workload would keep them completely invisible. "We need to move faster, Richard," Chloe's voice hissed through the speaker, tight with nervous agitation. The 60-day grace period on that $1.2 million secondary mortgage attachment is closing in. If the bank triggers an audit before she's locked away or declared missing, the whole paper trail points right back to your shell companies. We can't afford any more delays. I sat completely still at my desk, my fingers resting motionless over the keyboard. I didn't feel a surge of blind rage. There was no hot, stinging betrayal behind my eyelids, just the cold, clinical clarity of an auditor looking at an unbalancing ledger. Through the earbud, I heard Richard let out a dismissive, arrogant laugh, the kind of patronizing chuckle he always used whenever he talked about my profession behind my back. "Relax, Chloe," Richard scoffed, his voice dripping with casual cruelty. "Elena is entirely predictable. She's a machine built out of spreadsheets and chamomile tea. She doesn't suspect a thing. By next week, the evidence in the crawl space will do its work, the psychiatric narrative will stick, and she'll either be locked inside a facility or running for a federal warrant for financial fraud. Once she's out of the picture, that $3.5 million family estate and the trust funds are ours to clear out. Let her bury herself in her numbers. She's digging her own grave." Let her bury herself in her numbers. The words hung in my ear, sharp and absolute. Not a single tear fell from my eyes. My pulse didn't race. Instead, a profound sense of finality settled deep into my bones. He wasn't just cheating, he was actively engineering my destruction with a smile on his face. While their conversation continued to echo in my ear, my hands moved with practiced precision on my personal laptop. I didn't just listen to their betrayal, I recorded every second of it, logging the time-stamped audio file directly onto Marcus's encrypted cloud server. Then I accessed the remote administrator portal of our home's smart security system. With a few swift keystrokes, I bypassed the local user interface and pulled up the master access logs for the digital smart lock on the garage storage annex. There it was on my screen, the immutable digital footprint.
3 days prior, at 2:14 a.m., the system recorded a direct biometric facial recognition override. The user who unlocked the storage annex, where the forged documents and planted evidence had been stashed, wasn't a phantom intruder, and it certainly wasn't me. It was Richard. The high-definition security camera mounted above the doorway had captured a crystal-clear, wide-angle video clip of Richard's face as the system scanned his features, accompanied by his unique administrator PIN code, time-stamped directly into the server database. I exported the video file, matched it with the audio confession playing in my ear, and saved both into a master folder labeled Exhibit A. I pulled my earbud out, slipped it into my pocket, and closed my laptop lid with a soft, definitive click. Richard thought he was the puppeteer pulling every string in our lives, laughing at how easily he could manipulate my world. He had no idea that every arrogant word he spoke, every digital footprint he left behind, and every camera angle he forgot to disable was being meticulously cataloged to build the very cell that would soon lock him away for good.
Securing the digital audio confession and Richard's biometric login logs gave us the technical anchor for our case. But Marcus knew a digital file alone wouldn't completely dismantle a seasoned executive's defense in federal court. Every digital trail can be contested, debated, or twisted by high-priced corporate defense attorneys claiming unauthorized network access. To shatter Richard's frame-up once and for all, we needed the human element, the person whose name was physically attached to the trap planted in the public storage facility. That search led us straight to Samantha Hayes. Tracking her down wasn't easy, but for a former federal investigator like Marcus, finding someone drowning in high-interest debt across state lines was a matter of following the financial distress signals. Samantha was 29 years old, a former bartender who had once worked at an upscale cocktail lounge in downtown Chicago, before gambling debts in Atlantic City dragged her into a swamp of desperation, collection agencies, and ruined credit. 2 days after extracting the smart home recordings, Marcus and I drove out to a quiet, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of Juliet, where Samantha had been hiding out, working odd shifts under a cash-only arrangement. She looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed with chronic anxiety, jumping at every sudden sound near the diner booths. Marcus didn't approach her with heavy-handed federal intimidation or aggressive legal threats. He sat across from her booth with quiet patience, sliding a warm cup of black coffee across the laminate table, speaking with the measured calm of a man who understood how people get chewed up and spit out by bad choices. Instead of cornering her, Marcus offered her an escape hatch, a formal legal indemnity agreement drafted and countersigned by a federal attorney guaranteeing absolute immunity from prosecution for her role in the storage unit scheme, provided she told the unvarnished truth. The defense crumbled the moment she looked down at the paperwork. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around the warm mug, the heavy weight of fear finally breaking open into confession. Samantha admitted everything without hesitation. She told us how Chloe, Richard's 26-year-old legal assistant, paid her $15,000 USD to bring a set of old suitcases and rent a public storage unit under a fabricated alias, using a forged signature provided by Richard. "I didn't even know whose name was on the real lease," Samantha whispered, her voice cracking as she stared down into her coffee. "They told me it was just a corporate prank, a petty marital dispute. They swore nobody would ever get hurt." Marcus slid a pen across the table, his expression steady and immovable. "The only person they planned to hurt was an innocent woman, Samantha. The man who handed you that fake signature and the $15,000 didn't care if she lost everything she owned." Samantha swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears as she looked from the contract up to me. She didn't hesitate anymore.
She uncapped the heavy pen Marcus provided and signed her legal name across a formal, sworn affidavit, detailing every text message, every cash drop, and every meeting with Chloe. More importantly, she handed over the physical evidence we needed to bridge the financial gap, her personal bank statements showing the incoming wire transfer from Chloe's account matched against a matching outgoing wire originating directly from Richard's secret personal account. It was the missing link in the chain of custody. The money trail didn't just connect Chloe to the storage unit, it connected Richard directly to Chloe's bank account, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was the ultimate source of the funds and the mastermind behind the entire setup. We had the audio confession, we had the biometric video logs of Richard unlocking the annex, and now we had a sworn, notarized federal affidavit backed by an unbroken paper trail of bank transfers linking the husband directly to the hired decoy. As Samantha handed back the signed affidavit, her hands finally stopped shaking. She looked at me with a quiet, pleading vulnerability that cut straight through the tension of the diner booth. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the jum of the diner jukebox. "I really am. I was just so desperate to dig my way out of a hole, I didn't care who was standing at the bottom." I looked at the young woman sitting across from me, broken by bad choices, manipulated by greed, and used as a disposable pawn in my husband's grand design. I didn't feel anger towards her. My anger was reserved solely for the man sitting in our suburban estate, comfortably sipping his wine and believing he had successfully buried me. I gently placed my hand over Samantha's trembling fingers, offering her the one thing Richard denied everyone in his path: basic human grace. "You're not the one who dug the hole, Samantha," I said quietly, my voice calm and resolute. "You were just the shovel. The man holding the handle is about to fall in." With the signed affidavit, the bank receipts, and the witness testimony secured in our master file, we packed our briefcases and walked out into the crisp evening air. The 21-day countdown was reaching its final hours. Richard thought he was closing the net around me. He had no idea that the net had already been thrown over him, weighted down by his own greed and pulled tight by the very numbers he thought he had mastered.
The 21st day had arrived. The final hour of the countdown was ticking away in total, suffocating silence. It was precisely 11:59 at night. Downstairs, in the sprawling, vaulted living room of our Naperville estate, Richard and Chloe were sitting together on the plush white leather sofa, surrounded by the soft glow of recessed lighting and an open bottle of vintage Caymus Cabernet Sauvignon. They were clinking their crystal glasses together, toasting to what they believed was an absolute, undisputed victory. The 60-day legal window for the secondary mortgage attachments was expiring at midnight, and as far as they were concerned, the ghost of Elena Vance had been successfully buried under a mountain of fabricated debt and psychiatric rumors. They were laughing, a light, triumphant sound that echoed up through the open architectural loft of the upper hallway. I stood quietly in the shadows of the second-floor landing. I wasn't pacing, I wasn't holding a phone or dialing emergency services. Instead, I wore a dark charcoal silk robe, tying the belt with slow, measured precision as I looked down at the glowing screen of my tablet. With a single, deliberate swipe of my thumb across the glass, I executed the final command sequence programmed by Marcus and me. Downstairs, the lively chatter between Richard and Chloe was cut short by a sudden, sharp chime ringing out from Richard's high-end smartphone, lying on the coffee table. It was a high-priority push notification, sent directly from our home's integrated cloud storage server, tagged with a master override file. Richard frowned. Picking up the phone with a casual shrug of irritation, he swiped the screen to open the notification, expecting perhaps a bank alert confirming the final transfer or a routine notification from the security app.
Instead, the living room went violently silent. Without any manual input from the remote control, the massive 75-inch smart TV mounted above the marble fireplace suddenly blinked awake. The screen illuminated the dim room with a stark, blinding white glare before shifting to a clean, high-resolution document viewer, displaying a federal heading, Exhibit A, Forensic Audit and Sworn Deposition. Before Richard could even draw a breath to curse, the integrated surround sound speakers of the living room home theater roared to life. It wasn't a synthesized computer voice. It was his own voice, crystal clear, booming across the vaulted ceiling with terrifying fidelity. The audio recording of his conversation with Chloe from the master suite played on an endless looping playback. Every calculated word, every cruel laugh, every confession of how he planned to frame me, lock me away, and loot my inheritance trust. Chloe gasped, dropping her wineglass onto the plush rug as the color drained entirely from her face. She scrambled backward against the sofa cushions, staring at the television screen in raw, unadulterated panic. On the screen, the document viewer began scrolling downward automatically, page by page, exposing the 88 pages of meticulous financial records. Every hidden shell company, every fraudulent wire transfer, every tax evasion ledger, and every single forged signature bearing my name was laid out in brutal, undeniable detail. Right beside the financial ledgers appeared Samantha Hayes' sworn, notarized federal affidavit, accompanied by the bank wire receipts and the high-definition video footage of Richard using his own biometric facial recognition to unlock the storage annex where the planted evidence had been stashed. The trap hadn't just sprung, it had completely vaporized the cage he built around me, sealing him inside instead. Richard froze mid-sentence, the glass of wine slipping instantly from his paralyzed fingers. It struck the hardwood floor with a deafening crash, shattering into 1,000 crimson shards as the rich red liquid splattered across his expensive shoes. His entire body went rigid, the color vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse under the harsh glare of the television screen. Slowly, with agonizing stiffness, his head snapped upward toward the second-floor staircase. He expected the police. He expected federal agents kicking down the front door in a flurry of flashing lights and shouting sirens. Instead, there were no sirens. There was only dead silence, broken entirely by the steady, unyielding sound of my footsteps descending the stairs. I walked down the steps at a slow, deliberate pace, the dark charcoal silk of my robe whispering against the wooden risers. I stopped on the third step from the bottom, looking down at the two shivering figures cowering on the sofa below. My face was completely devoid of emotion. No anger, no tears, no triumph, just an absolute razor-sharp stillness that cut straight through their panic. Richard dropped his head into his shaking hands, a strangled, broken sound escaping his throat as the reality of his total destruction finally crashed down upon him. The game was over. The numbers had spoken, and there was nowhere left to run. The morning sun of Thursday cut through the crisp autumn air with a sharp, blinding brilliance. It was exactly 8 o'clock when the heavy rubber tires of federal vehicles crunched softly against the paved driveway of our Naperville estate. There were no flashing red and blue lights announcing a chaotic raid, and there were no frantic sirens screaming down the suburban cul-de-sac. The federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division operated with quiet, unyielding precision. 2 cars blocked the front gates, while 4 agents walked briskly up the wide stone steps toward the double mahogany doors. Richard and Chloe were still sitting in the living room where they had spent the entire night paralyzed in shock. They hadn't slept a single minute. When the heavy brass knocker struck the front door, Richard looked up with a hollow, bloodshot gaze, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold a coffee cup. He expected me to open the door and demand explanations. Instead, I walked down the stairs fully dressed in a tailored navy blazer, carrying my briefcase, and unlocked the front deadbolt myself. I stepped aside and simply nodded to the lead federal agent. Within seconds, the heavy oak doors swung wide. The agents moved through the foyer with practiced calm, bypassing me entirely as they walked straight into the living room. Before Richard could even stand up from the sofa or stammer out a legal protest, cold steel handcuffs snapped around Richard's wrists with a sharp metallic click. Chloe shrieked in terror as another agent cuffed her wrists behind her back, her face twisting in utter disbelief as she was hauled up from the white leather couch where they had toasted their supposed victory just hours before. They weren't being arrested for a local domestic dispute or a petty marital disagreement. The federal indictment laid out 7 severe felony counts: wire fraud, tax evasion, interstate conspiracy, money laundering through illicit shell companies, and the federal crime of fabricating evidence to frame an innocent citizen. As the agents led them out through the grand entryway, Richard's eyes locked onto mine. His face was completely drained of color, his expensive suit rumpled and stained with spilled wine. He opened his mouth, desperately trying to find some shred of arrogance, some final cutting remark to salvage his shattered pride. "Elena, please," Richard choked out, his voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic plea. "We can fix this. Talk to them. Tell them it's a misunderstanding." I looked down at the man who had spent 8 years meticulously plotting my financial ruin and psychological destruction. I didn't yell, I didn't spit venom or hurl insults back at him. My voice was as calm and steady as a quiet lake. "The numbers balanced themselves, Richard," I said softly, my gaze piercing straight through his panic. "You just didn't like the final audit." The federal agents didn't give him another second to speak. They guided him firmly down the stone steps and placed him into the back of the unmarked federal vehicle. Chloe was led to the second car parked behind him. Within moments, the doors closed with a solid, heavy thud, and the tires began to roll down the driveway, their tires crunching softly against the fallen orange leaves. I stood alone on the front porch, pulling my coat tighter around my shoulders as the morning breeze rustled through the canopy of the changing autumn maples. I watched the federal cars turn the corner at the end of the street until they disappeared entirely behind the vibrant red and gold foliage of the neighborhood trees. There was no sudden surge of bitter triumph burning in my chest, no hollow sense of revenge or petty vindication. Instead, as I stood there in the quiet morning light, a profound, overwhelming wave of peace washed over me. It was the feeling of a heavy anchor finally slipping free from a drowning soul, leaving behind a clean, unbroken expanse of calm. The battle was over, but the true victory wasn't watching them fall into the trap they built. The victory was realizing that the storm could rage all around me and my foundation would never crack again. Later that afternoon, sitting at the mahogany conference table in downtown Chicago across from my corporate attorney, I didn't hesitate. I picked up a heavy black fountain pen and signed my name cleanly across the final binding pages of the expedited divorce decree, severing every legal tie to a man who had traded his soul for numbers. With the second stroke of the pen, I executed the final transfer of ownership for the entire $3.5 million Naperville estate, signing the deed directly over to the charitable foundation established in memory of my parents, a sanctuary dedicated to helping victims of financial abuse rebuild their lives from the ground up. I walked out of the downtown law office into the bright afternoon sun, carrying only a single leather briefcase and a quiet, unbroken spirit. In the end, I finally understood the truth that every manipulative predator fails to grasp in the dark. A malicious man can calculate every dollar, forge every signature, and engineer every elaborate trap to control the world around him. But he will never be able to measure or contain the quiet, enduring power of a woman who chooses stillness, intellect, and relentless patience to protect her own soul.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in, and what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.